Good morning and welcome to another book-based interview where today we're talking to poet and author Ectorius Angel. Inspired by classical arts and history, Ectorius specializes in creating prose that delivers amazing insight into the world we live in today. If you guys are interested in following Ectorius's journey, please check out his Instagram at Ectorius Angel, Ectoriusangel. But Ectorius, thank you so much for being here.
Of course, thank you very much for having me as well.
Of course, of course. So, just getting into our first question, tell me your story on how you became an author and a poet, or whichever order that started, because I know those are two very different things.
That started many years ago. If I have to be like 100% honest, this started when I was possibly 8 years old,
Mhm.
or give or take 8 years old. I found myself writing in another country at the time, and there were hardships that were not really that great to endure, and it wasn't an easy life, really. I had a really like rough upbringing back and forth because there was a lot of bad things to go through. And being a foreigner, being expat, and being someone who goes into other countries and isn't quite welcomed so easily, my only respite at that time was writing or art in any art in general. I started writing things online
Mhm.
first. Well, no, I started writing things personally first in this little. I had this little shabby notebook. I had this high school shabby notebook, 8 or 9 years old, give or take at the time. Started writing things down there. There wasn't really anything important. It was just stream of thought. You just keep writing stuff, whatever. You keep writing, 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 and eventually something comes off it. Nothing really came off it, but it was a beginning idea.
Mhm.
It started the flow of, okay, I know what I'm thinking. How can I do more with this? What can I do more with this? How do I go from here to something else? I decided to then write short stories, so like these little. They weren't really like big short stories. They were small short stories. They weren't really important, and they were tiny short stories that I would write on these role play writing websites and stuff like that. Eventually, come a year later, someone picked it up because they were interested in it and said, I like this. Have you considered writing full time? Have you considered really, really pursuing writing? Because this is good. This is really good for someone of your age. And that's like, I was 8, 9 years old. So it's like, I didn't really get it. I still don't get it because I don't believe in sort of praise. I believe more in you work for what you earn. You
Mhm.
earn what you work for. And I told that person, yes, I want to pursue writing. It is something that actually really, really interests, well, not just interests me, it's something that helped me survive. If I didn't have writing, I wouldn't be alive. I know that for a fact. This is something that I've learned now is without writing, without art, without painting, I wouldn't be alive. It wouldn't be me. My then author mentor, Jules, picked me up. She's a historical author by nature, and I didn't know she was a published author at the time. I was too young to really know this. I kind of just sort of took up the offer of being taught and mentored by this person because at the time she was a stranger, didn't really know her, didn't know anything about writing in the world of writing, didn't know anything. She picked me up, and ever since then, I began my writing journey, give or take there. That was the moment I sort of went from I'm writing because I'm struggling and I want to live another day to I don't want to kill myself and I don't want to end my life. Now I have an opportunity to express that, but also do more.
Mhm.
And she took me in, gave me a safe space. She mentored me day and night, taught me really everything from writing to editing to poetry, philosophy, the importance of books, the importance of philosophy, the importance of really everything in general that I would know later on throughout my life. She's the one who gave me that knowledge foundation first and helped me go from one area to another little by little, give or take.
Right.
And that's what began my well, you could say it's a journey, but it's more of a lifetime commitment. It's an ambition, it's a lifetime commitment, it's a promise to yourself. You're going to keep doing it because you started it. Now you have a duty to keep doing it. Now, if you fail that duty, you fail every other promise you've ever made.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for sharing the honesty in your answer. I think it's very apparent right off the bat that you definitely carry your sense of artmanship to a degree where you recognize it to the fullest extent and you give respect to how you view art.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, like for example, if you go to an art museum and like you look at a painting, some people, everybody sees something different, but there are people that tend to linger longer because they also sense regardless of whether you understand the message or not, the craftsmanship behind making that art is sometimes worthy of that moment of pause itself, just to give
Yeah.
respect to the fact that the work was put in to create something that is meant for us to kind of consume mentally and try to interpret it for our own lives. And I think art is a very profound thing that a lot of people have different definitions for. And I wanted to ask, with your experiences in life and saying how you went through such hardships, what do you think was it about writing that ultimately saved you the way that you're explaining it compared to maybe something else you probably could have gotten into to help you get out of a dark place?
As in, what? How did it save me, or more sort of what made me continue it?
I guess, like, what was it about writing that kind of helped you get through rough moments rather than another activity?
I think it was the fact that with writing, no matter if someone sees you write it and reads it, of course they'll judge it. Anyone will judge anything. People are judgy by nature. This is our human nature. We
Mhm.
are that way. But even if someone judges you for it and don't like it, or they have something to say about it, to me, writing was a lifeline. And no matter what anyone thought, felt, or had to say something about it, I was not going to simply stop or stand in my little seat and say nothing, or, you know, do nothing. I was a foreigner at the time. I got beat up several times when I was a kid, and won't even lie about that. I did. Because foreigners at the time weren't that welcomed across different countries in Europe. It was early 2000s, so it's not like, very open minded just yet. And that little piece of safety, a little piece of this is my area, this is no one else's area, I am here alone, I have nothing and no one but just words. And they didn't bring me a lot of comfort. Of course, it didn't. It's words. I can't work with just words. You need someone's hug, you need touch, you need more. But not having a lot of these things, not having someone to comfort you, not having someone to tell you everything will be all right. I think that sort of gave me that little inkling of I can write something. And even if I hate it tomorrow, I wrote out what I feel so that I don't have to feel this by the end of this night. Or at least to some extent, I can still feel it. But tomorrow morning, I'll know what I felt, why I felt it, and how else I can keep going from that point onward. Because there was nothing else that would ever get me through it unless I did it on my own.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I think it kind of even sounds a little bit therapeutic how your ability to write your words into, onto paper, it kind of allowed you to not only recognize what's happening around you is happening, but it also allowed you to kind of progress as well from that situation that you were in.
It
And
really did.
yeah, and people don't really talk about writing like that. People say that, like, when you think about writing, people do think about like fiction, or like they think about the books and the literary genres that we think about today. But like when you really kind of dilute, they're not dilute, I guess, but when you go really specific onto like what is writing, I think it's really a communication device for first yourself and then for others, because the first person that views your words is the person that writes it, of course. And I think there is a connection that authors or writers tend to have with their own creations before they share it to the public. And I think it's really important to hear that in your story, the impact that your own words had with you. Because I don't think people really talk about that. I think people kind of look over the self impact that your own work can have on yourself until maybe later. I know, like, maybe if you're an artist for a very long time and you look back, I think it's very easy to kind of talk about like the journey and how you got better as an artist, but to see how it healed you in a sense and kind of protected you in a moment where you almost were kind of
You
entering a
know,
period of darkness, it seemed very important.
I wouldn't say it healed me. If I have to be like actually honestly, I wouldn't say it healed me.
Hmm.
Writing has been anything but healing. Yes, it's a survival tool for me. Yes, but it's been anything but healing. Writing has been for me day in and day out suffering. I can't say it has been not. It has been. It is. You need to suffer to write. You need to suffer to think. You need to suffer to feel. You need to suffer through things you don't ever want to suffer through to write honestly. And I've learned this recently from my own professor, or well, lecturer now, Judith Hennigan. Mind you, she's an amazing lecturer by all means. And by God, I wouldn't, know how to progress further without some specific teachings I've learned even recently. I'm 27 now, and you might say, well, the 27, you probably know most things by now, and yeah, you do. But now being at university again and doing a degree and all that, I remember having a conversation with Miss Hannigan, and that conversation was more some through emails and some in person. And my struggle was, how do I write something honestly without hurting other people? Because this was nonfiction. We were doing nonfiction modules in classes, and her answer was, write honestly. Doesn't matter who you hurt, doesn't matter how much it hurts, just write honestly. Even if it hurts other people, even if you end up naming some people, even if you end up doing something that can hurt someone's emotions, you have a duty of being honest. And I have to agree with that, having understood how little joy writing really gives you. It's not therapeutic so much as it is a survival tool, but to some people like me, for me now, if I don't write, I know for a fact I will not live. I know that tomorrow, if I do not write, I will go insane. To me, writing is as natural as breathing now. Even if I haven't published my work just yet, now I understand that if I don't write, I cannot survive another day. I have to write. It is an insanity. It is like a calling that keeps calling to you day in and day and night and day and night. Everything you do is writing. You eat, that's writing. You drink, that's writing. You so much as breathe and look at something, that's writing, because you are imagining entire stories, how to describe it, how to say it, how to color it, how to describe emotion, a feeling, a sensation. Anything I so much as do now, to me, is writing, and it is a torturous, god awful thing. I cannot say it's therapeutic, I can, but I can say that it is a helpful tool that lives on and helps you live on if you learn how to use it the right way, if that makes sense.
Right.
To some people it might be therapeutic, and I might agree to it. Yes, of course you should write. It is very handy. But there's also a very darker side that is not talked about, and it's the part where, to some writers who are born with this notion of writing and talent, not writing is the equal part of standing on a tightrope on a bridge and looking out and saying, I either have two options. Option A, I see the water and that is my end, or I see the ground and I step down. It's the same with writing. It's I either write today and I live another day to survive, and I express what I want and feel and have to say, or I call myself into the abyss and heed the call of that darkness and walk that path and never return. It's more or less the same aspect for me.
Mhm.
To some others, perhaps it might not be, and I understand that, but to me, it is. To me, it has to be. Because without it, I wouldn't be who I am today, so to speak.
No, I think that's really important to talk about, and I think you're right. I think the relationship that one person has with art, I think, is a range. I think it definitely goes from people that just see it as something whimsical that they can enjoy, and then there are people that absolutely need it and can't live like a day without using it
Yeah.
to help express themselves. And I think it's very common to kind of maybe see something in the middle or see something even on more on the whimsical side, because to even have deep conversations, I think a lot of people in general aren't very used to having deep conversation about things like, what do I really need to live for, and what do I need to continue moving on. But for you to use something like art and like to use writing as that survival mechanism to keep on going, I think yeah, there is darkness behind it, but I don't think it's a dark concept to talk about. I think what it is that it shows just how it shows just how grand something as beautiful as art is, where you can have
Yeah.
darker relationships with it and still use that to create something that could be profound for another person to interpret. I
Yeah.
think what you're saying is extremely honest, and I want to also, like, it actually made me wonder, do you ever struggle with channeling your thoughts through writing? Like, I feel like writing may be easier for you, but do you ever have moments where, like, the emotion or the things that you feel sometimes are so heavy or so profound for you that it makes it hard for you to actually know what words to write on the paper?
I no, I don't think I do. How do I say this? There are days where I will wake up and I will complain to my partner and tell her, I haven't written anything for 3 days, a week, a month, give it like there will be long periods where I will have not written anything, and I have 4 or 5 poetry collections I've written now. I have 3 books I've written. One who is awaiting for a publisher, and will be for until it is the due time for it. And I've poems I've written. I've written so many things now, and there are days where I will complain and I will say I have not written anything, and I feel frustrated, I feel angry, I feel disappointed, I feel like I'm not doing right by anything and everyone and myself and my art and everything else in this life. I'm not doing any justice to anything. And of course those days will be the days where like I have nothing in my mind. I can't nothing comes to me. Just not an idea, not a word, nothing. But the days that I feel the heaviest are perhaps the easiest days for me to write. Without those days, I feel I cannot write as good and as great as I can possibly achieve, because those heavy days are the days in which I know 100% what I want to say. The days that I don't are perhaps the worst ones, because those are the days where I cannot write anything and nothing comes to me. Those I find more annoying than having the heavier days. I would prefer day in and day out to be as heavy as possible and still be able to write. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge that if you do that every single day, not only are you going to be depressed constantly, and you're gonna be unable to make people understand. You are in such a place that you cannot be understood by others. There's no possibility for any person on this earth to really understand you. Not even if you express yourself honestly or any other means of expressing yourself. If you didn't have those days every day, I would struggle to write. But I still understand it. I have to have a balance. I have to be able to be happy and be able to do more things throughout my day, and be able to go through my next day and still be able to say, okay, maybe I've not written something, but I still have something else to do today and tomorrow and the day after. Then rather every day be heavy, because then I'm not gonna be able to wake up and smile, or wake up and do justice by the person I love, or really do justice by anyone, because then I'll just be constantly depressed. And I really suffer with this as is. Every day is heavy. But at the same time, if you only have heavy days, as you know, you can't quite live. You have to be an adult. You have to be a responsible person, and at the end of the day. So as much as I would prefer having those days, I can't always have them.
Right, right.
Really, really can't.
No, absolutely. The way you talk about art, like, I don't know, I just got this image. It's kind of like dark chocolate. Like, I feel like the way you talk about art is very enriching. Like, um, it's very genuine, and I can tell that there's layers to the way that you speak about your relationship with writing, because it really seems like I know in the beginning of this interview I said it's something that I can clearly tell that you have respect for, but I've never seen somebody talk about it almost as if it's like its own entity that's alive and breathing around us. Like, you definitely carry this vision of like art being something that you always have to acknowledge, and that also includes you kind of navigating your own emotional spectrum to kind of understand how you can even go about talking to writing. It's almost like an invisible partner that you always have to like nod your head to whenever you decide to notice them. And
Yeah,
I think, while the process of creating art can be sometimes very heavy, and like what you were saying, I think that's a great way to put it, is that the heaviness allows you to create art, and sometimes you may prefer that to keep that inspiration going. But I also am happy to hear that like you also understand that you can't just lose yourself in the madness, because the quality of person you become throughout that process may affect other people as well. And like, yeah,
yeah,
there are some days where you have to kind of put on another mask, I guess, in the sense where you aren't an artist today. Maybe you are just Ectorius, a person walking around talking to people. And that's, I think, as an artist, that's something that in some way everybody has to deal with, if you're an author, for example, not every day you're going to be writing a chapter of your book. Some of these days you might be going to events, or if you're a family person, you might be with your family. And these all require you to access like different parts of yourself. And I think from how you speak, it just seems like, you acknowledge that a pure form of yourself is through your writing. And I think that's a really great way to kind of show how you're meant to kind of be an artist. I think it starts off by you acknowledging just how much fruit can come from this labor of you having to
yeah,
toil and kind of addressing your own state of mind and like putting that on paper. And that's, yeah, I could see how, it makes more sense the more that you explain your story as being a writer. I see now how you're saying like this is a form of necessity for me, rather it being a form of therapy, because this is kind of like one of those things where it's like it's like a foundation of how you formed to be able to acknowledge who you are as a person, and it's helped you kind of also acknowledge your identity as a person.
Yeah, quite a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, and that's
Without like I could, a recent example I can give you is doing this new degree for me. I'm done with the first year now.
mhm,
I'm studying literature and creative writing over here in England. We have homework usually that's given to us as students, and you know how university does. You did the university as well.
mhm,
Those weeks where you have like homework for modules and such, and we have homework that's given to us by our lecturers. And there were many times where there would be several weeks of homework back on back to back to back that were given out, and I was possibly present only for a few of these lectures, and some of them I wasn't, and most of them I probably wasn't because I was busy or working or something else. And most of the students, they have this little Zoom group where they share things, and you have your feedback and such. The social aspect of sharing and having feedback and workshopping on things. I decided not to. I wrote something that was far too personal, far too heavy, far too, to some extent, extremely dangerously depressing in a way that even made my lecturer be concerned and reach out by email and ask like, are you okay? Is everything okay? And of course I was okay. It's just my style of writing is just very depressing. It's very, very genuine. If I actually give you the prose I write outside of poetry, because on my Instagram and everything you've seen so far is mainly poetry, but if I give you my prose, it is the most extremely depressing thing you'll possibly ever read, and I can't change that. I grew up with that type of stylicism. It's the old classic stylicism you grow up with Chinese and Japanese and Western influences from way back, and you sort of adapt those to your own writing style. And sure, of course, it's very concerning, but I decided not to, and instead I emailed my lecturer the full extent of what I've written throughout those several weeks and gave it to my lecturer for feedback instead. And in a sense, that was me taking that entity of the writing and taking that entity of I see you, I acknowledge you, you are here, and I hate you, and every day I despise seeing you in front of me. But I have to do it regardless. I have to acknowledge you, I have to let you in and let you do your thing. And that sort of became what that thing sort of wound up becoming as a new project now that I'm writing on now. Even now it's being developed into full book, but that became a thing, and I sort of sent that to my professor, and she sort of more or less understood there's a lot in here. There's a lot to unpack here. Not easy, and very, very personal, deep and dark, and extremely heavy too, because there's questions regarding funerals, there's questions regarding death, and there's questions regarding existence and coexistence with people, thinking how to coexist with people, thinking what to do next, whether you want to live on another day, whether you don't want to live on another day, how you deal with existentialism. Yeah, I'd say like the sheer capacity for writing to become its own living entity and caucus, one and both, is quite it's quite there. It is alive. It's just not as easy to it's not as easy to utilize it. If
right.
you get my drift, it's not that easy to grab onto it and say, do my bidding or else. Because in the end, it's that entity controlling you, not it. Not you controlling it, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's honest. I think the
Yeah.
struggle with utilizing it is what makes it an honest attempt. Because I think if you didn't struggle with it, I think that would kind of question like, are you really going like for example that you're saying that this is a necessary framework for how you go about understanding life. You carry it to the highest degree. When you do write, it's naturally heavy, but I think the fact that it's heavy and you're struggling to like utilize it and stuff, I think makes it a genuine attempt at trying to create something that is honest, which is what you were saying earlier, where it's like, when you write, and you were saying that you learned this from your mentor, if you're going to write, you're going to be honest. And like, there are moments where you are going to feel that imbalance of like, you know, just that imbalance in like trying to properly utilize the art form. And I think that just also furthers the amount of respect that you have for writing, because I see writing, if you take that and you like kind of put an image to it, I think of it as like a it's like trying to tame a dragon or some kind of like profound beast almost, where you may think that some moments you might have the reins on and like, hey, I have control over this, but it's usually a perspective that we have on ourselves trying to control something that is essentially uncontrollable. Like the art form itself of writing is it's bigger than all of us. Our job is to be able to see how we can just grab a piece of it and try to just utilize it the best way we can. But it's alive and it's breathing and it's around us. And I think the way that you speak, it's very relatable to a lot of like old classical works that has a lot more of a deeper personal relationship with art, where it's not mostly about making people feel better, but it's about just sharing what people ultimately think about. Like you brought up topics like funerals, death, existentialism, relationships with other human beings in your social network. I think these have always been questions that humanity has always tried to contemplate, but has never really fully found an answer for. And that makes sense. I mean, we don't know what happens after death. We don't know, we always will find funerals awkward, because in a world where we see life, we're met with moments of extreme, grief and even death in front of us. And it does make us wonder, like, what is this, what is the purpose behind all of this, what is our role in this, what I'm witnessing honest, or is it something that people are telling me to believe? There's so many things that come into how we perceive some of the things that you talk about. And I think it's great that like you take people might see this as a classical approach, but I kind of see it as a genuine approach, where you're kind of looking at this in a sense where it's like, my job is to be honest, and my job is to use this necessary art form to the best degree that I can, which requires me to have the heavy moods, to have the ability to say, hey, I'm going to share this even if it's a little bit too deep or a little bit too heavy. Maybe it's not for a classroom, but I think it's still amazing that you were able to share that with a lecturer, because that shows that you are still willing to at least, still be the person that you want to be, which is being the writer that you have been working towards this whole time. And I think that's great. I looked at the stuff that you read, and you have read a lot of classical works like the Odyssey, but you've also read philosophical works like the works of Plato. And I wanted to ask, what do you think is important about reading scripture like this, or old text like from ancient times that people just consider classics? And how do you apply that to your own writing, since you also seem to kind of go down that line of very honest writing?
I mean, I've read a lot of works. I have. As far as you've seen on my Goodreads, that's only a small capacity of what I've read in so far, because I can't exactly add like every single book I've ever read on Goodreads, because that'll take months of work.
Yeah.
300 plus some books that are already on there. It's going to be anything from Plato to Aristoteles to most other philosophical books within the 15th and 16th century, to classical books like F. Scott Fitzgerald or Banana Yoshimoto or Haruki Murakami, or there's gonna be a lot.
Hmm.
But having read these type of works and having grown up, because I didn't grow up with a natural way of reading. When most people around me, when I was younger, I didn't grow up with that sort of idea of you read on an iPad or like a Kindle as people do now. I'm not familiar with these, so just bear in mind I don't know how these things work.
Mhm.
I grew up, sometimes my punishment would be to read, and I might have rebelled against it, but believe you me, I actually liked it.
Yeah.
Like I did rebel against it, and God, by God, did I hate being inside and not being allowed to do anything. But at the same time, having that time alone where I can just read whatever I want and sort of go about, oh, my punishment's this? Sure, I'll do this. And
Yeah.
and and I was a cocky little brat when I was young. I really was. But I've learned that growing up this way, where I had to read throughout my life and understand reading, not just read to read, because as kids, sometimes you will read to read and that's it. You don't really understand anything else. But I read to understand because I had to. And we went to museums, we went to parks, castle grounds, islands. And I remember having read the Odyssey and Homer's Iliad, and having also my partner, for example, just recently, a year or so ago, or a bit longer, I don't quite remember when, she gifted me the Homer's, what's it called? Homer's collection of travels, the one he where he wrote every single thing, every place he's been to, every geographical land spot, everything. And it's this big collection with footnotes and bibliographies and research. It's a very, very big, heavy book, and
Wow.
I remember being extremely overjoyed. And I asked her to get this for me because I really, really loved it. Well, not asked her, I showed her, and I was really excited about it, and thank God she got it for me, and I was overjoyed. But the reason I'm overjoyed with books like these is in modern times, we don't have honest writing anymore. I
Mhm.
can't say we do. I've read a lot of modern works now, even. Sure, I've read like, Six of Crows from Leigh Bardugo and many other general works that are more modern. And there are, yeah, there are some still honest works. There are, but they're far less. They're far less. They sell less. They're published less, and the quality of writing, the quality of thinking, the quality of feeling, the quality of philosophizing, questioning, and then coming to an answer is far less now than it ever used to be before. And I think that's why I read these works. Is for me, I want answers, but I don't want just answers. I want to know, how did people write before me? Why did people write before me? What incentivized them to suffer hell eternal in every manner of way? And I mean this in every way. Hemingway went through hell and back, both having his legs shattered apart during the war and then having concussions and more. And, many authors went through hell and back and still wrote something. And that to me is more important to learn about and know about than to learn about some contemporary artist who wrote about some lies or something in propaganda, or I don't know, wrote a published book that became famous and became a novelist for it, but didn't really write something really, really comprehensively deep and nurturing as a human being. Because if I read another modern work, all I'm really getting is stories. And sure, stories are important. Harry Potter. Even if you may hate J.K. Rowling for whatever reasons you may have for your, I don't know, your political views, she still wrote books that children read and that gave them hope to continue on the next day because they had fantasies, they had imaginations about wizardry and magic and, you know, all the things about being a magician, a wizard. I even did. I love magic. I love wizardry. I love all sorts of spells and stuff. Amazing. Give me a wand. Give me spells. But, you know, that's only one it's only one side of that. It's like the light gentle touch of add magic, add fantasy, add, humor and jokes and good characters, and yeah, that's great and all, but that's only where you can go so far. You need other works that come before you to go even further, to understand human nature, to understand history, philosophy, art, archaeology, languages. I work with languages. My main profession is languages, even. So, understanding language is a human form of communication, and beyond just human form of communication. How do birds communicate? How do animals communicate? How do plants communicate? How does everything around us communicate? I think that's important, but it seems to me that this art style, not just art style, this idea of learning about it, understanding it, is almost lost. I see students complain about having to read 90 pages to like 200 pages within a week, and to me that's like, why are you complaining about reading a book? Have you never read anything else in your life? Have you never written anything in your life? They complain about essays. And even modern students in most universities do this now. They complain about essays or reading, and it confounds me, because it's as though humanity has lost the will to write and read and understand things. Having to read 300 pages within a week and then write 5,000 words or 20,000 words or 100,000 words within, I don't know, let's say a week, 2 weeks, that should come natural to you as a human being. It should really, really come natural to you as a human being. It is something that has been passed on to us for millennia, from the beginning of writing on tablets and stones and making paintings on walls to now. It's something that our ancestors have been passing on to us back and forth and back and forth, and now people don't do this anymore. And to me, that was primarily like one of the main important factors of why I started to read any classical work. Was this was passed on to me. I have a duty in knowing this. I'm young, yeah, sure, maybe I'm like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, even 15 years old maybe. But even then, I have a duty in knowing it. I have a duty in understanding, where do I come from? Where did they come from? Where does any of this come from? What do I do with this? What does anyone else do with it? How do I communicate? Do I use words, signs, body language? What do I do? What does anyone really in this planet do at all? Because if I don't communicate, and they don't communicate,
Right.
or they don't learn to communicate, then how are you going to get your emotions and feelings and your ideas and any vision you have to be shown in any capacity?
Hmm.
How are you going to be, for example, Elon Musk? And he doesn't really get along well with people. And Elon is a lovely person. He actually is, but he has a vision. And many people find him strange. And there's the whole thing with Twitter, X, whichever, and these type of things. And the way he communicates with people is also perhaps strange to them. But if you have a vision like Elon Musk, and you have something like a dream you want to achieve, you want to put people into space, you want to create the next robot, you want to create the next marble sculpture, anything really of any scale, you can't show that without reading and learning about the things before you. A sculpture or a painter, I'm a painter myself, even I couldn't express my paintings without going to another museum and sitting there and drawing these things over and over and over. Some days I went to museums myself all alone, and I remember all I did on those days were I sat down, I brought this little shabby notebook with me, and all I would do was just draw the same thing again and again and again and again. Even if it was horrible, didn't turn out any way I wanted it, I'd still do it. Because my understanding is if you want to convey what you want, you first need to learn how. And to learn how, you need to be willing to do exactly what's necessary to do so, which is read classical works, look at classical paintings, look at inventions. Even as an author, yeah, sure, my duty is writing, but I still have to also look at technology and language and politics and philosophy and history and medicine. I have to look at everything, every single part of humanity. I don't think many people think the same way I do, but I actually have to. If I have to show my vision, I have to study humanity in every single sense, not just one, every single sense. And that also includes understanding, how do you use medicine, for example. And God knows I didn't know how to at all. I'm not a medic. But I had to learn. I had to genuinely learn. How do I use medicine? How do I use poison? How do I use alchemy? How do I use technology? How do I use anything at all?
Right.
How? And so I went out of my way. Sometimes I'd go alone and just draw. Never turned out for anything. Eventually, yeah, I did become a painter, but like it took a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think to
Absolutely.
me that answer is if you have to learn, no, not have to. If you want to be honest with your work and you want to go the full way, you have to read every single piece of classical literature you can get your hands on, including philosophy, including history, poetry, any work of any humanitarian form that there really is. Period.
No, I hear what you're saying, and thank you for giving that answer. I think, yeah, the art of communication does not come naturally. I think we do have a level
Yeah.
of communication that like comes naturally, of course, which is like through biological means, which is like watching people speak language, you'll catch on and you eventually start to communicate. But when it comes to the arts and stuff, like I 100% agree with you. I think we live in a time where I don't think people talk much about the humanities anymore as like its own thing, and like, the irony is that the humanities, it's I think the reason people in the past found the humanities so beautiful was because it encompassed a lot more than what we consider the humanities
Uh,
today. Like, I think back then, the humanities didn't just include psychology, sociology, and like specific types of sciences. It was everything plus poetry, literature, biology. It was more about understanding the world, and then once you understood the world, understanding humanity's place in the world, or trying to see how that works. And there was a lot of, I think there's a lot of deep examples of like literature where you see authors back in the day, like classical artists. One of my favorite classical works is the novel Stoner by John Williams. And I think that was a really great novel when I read it, because it was, you know it wasn't an original thought, but the way it was expressed felt so original because of how honest the way John Williams was speaking about the situation with this character, that made me feel like, dang, like, sometimes you're surprised by how seen you feel by art that was made before you. You think you're alone in
yeah,
something, and then you go to a museum or you read a classical work and you realize that there was somebody that was living thousands of years before you that had a similar, like, either a conundrum or a similar question, a similar dream, and they communicated it the way that they can. And if you want to
yeah,
learn how to communicate, you have to follow the same processes, which is learning the game and understanding what exactly goes into being a proper communicator when it comes to conveying these large messages. And I think, when we talk about like the struggle with how we don't really see this in modern works anymore, I think it's what you were saying is that there are still there, but I think the reason it may come off as less is because I think we just have so many other forms of communication because of technology. I think we as a human, as humanity, we're struggling with understanding what to prioritize in today's society because of how fast technology is moving. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
yeah, like writing was so amazing back in the day and so profound and so common because that was probably the only form of communication for a very long time, besides painting, of course, and other forms. But in the written form, you know, writing, scripture, music, poetry, prose, like this was how these were the forms of how people communicated deep messages.
And it's always been a thing, yeah.
Has always been a thing. But now, we're looking around, we have social media, which is such a brand new concept if you really think about it, right? The idea to create a artificial life, an artificial form of messaging to come off a different way. But maybe you might have a bad day. Social media, you're taking a selfie by the beach because you want to show a different message. And, it's weird in a fun way, I think, because I think this serves as a healthy challenge for us to go back to recognize what really is important to us. I think in a world where we're slammed with so many options to communicate, I think eventually we're going to see a bit of a revival towards the classics because I always believe that in times where things are too new and too abundant in terms of quantity and we just feel overwhelmed, I think we always have a natural innate instinct to kind of go back. Like I think about people that go on retreats, like without technology, where they go on these health retreats, they turn off their phone and they go camping. For some people that's just a normal life. Like they don't even go on their phone that much. They probably enjoy going the outdoors route. But
Yeah,
for someone
I
that's
do the same
living
too.
yeah, exactly. But there's some, for example, a CEO that's living in a city that's surrounded by concrete cars and technology all the time. They see something that we take as normal, like camping and unplugging. They see that as a luxury. And I think that's what's happening is that the things that we were so used to having are becoming more of a luxury, but that also creates the argument of like, well, how do we feel about this? If we really value this, then like what you're saying is that we have to be students of these works as well. We have to study them and we have to kind of bring them into our own relationship with life to make sure that these messages don't go lost. So, no, I appreciate that answer. And I think it's a really great message to share to people where, people, if they ever ask, like, how do I create the ability or how do I learn the ability to communicate such deep and personal messages the way that maybe some classical artists may have like in the past. Study them, learn them, understand them, even if it takes a long time, like what you're saying with the shabby notebook. You just did sketches over and over again. you know it's the same thing if someone were to read the same story over and over again. You may gain something new and you may gain more insight on how you can communicate your own message in a similar style. So I think that's a great takeaway. I definitely I think that I'm really excited because I know before this interview I asked you if you can pull up a poem or just something of yours to share that we can discuss, and I think that would be a great way to end this interview. But I think before we get there, I do think that we did a great job at discussing the building blocks of your foundation, at least on how you like to go about writing, and I think it's extremely I think it's such a it's brave. It's brave what you're doing, which is dealing with something like using writing as a necessary tool, dealing with the heavy days, dealing with the fact that you do have, the depression that comes in some days, or the memories of like your childhood that sometimes makes you feel uncomfortable, to communicate all of that and be able to wear that as a writer and be able to create poetry and create things. I think that's such a it's a beautiful human thing. I think it's the most human thing that you can do, which is go through something and to communicate it the way only humans can, which is through writing, which is through the communication that only humans are able to do. So, yeah, I think that was such a great message. Like, thank you, Ectorius, for sharing that. I think that was really special to hear you kind of dive in deep with something that I think some people feel, but they're too scared to talk about. If we're being honest, I feel like people do feel
I
this.
think they're always going to be scared of doing that.
Yeah.
I, look, let me be honest. half of the people I meet in my life, they're never willing to do this no matter what. You
Right.
can confront them all you want. You can put them on the spot. You can highlight them. You can be angry at them, shout at them, and still they'll be stubborn and disagree and act like you're the monster for speaking out on what is actually right and what is actually the truth.
Right.
And they'll I don't know, they'll start fights of over they'll start fights over really anything in general as is.
Yeah.
But if you are willing to speak out and say the truth and offend people, even if it hurts them, sometimes you have to.
Hmm.
It's cruel, it's painful, and sometimes you're gonna be the monster and be hated for it, and you're gonna be taught as a horrible person. I certainly am a horrible person. I know this. I've done my fair share of bad things. But if you don't do it, you're just gonna keep letting the cycle continue.
Right.
That's all you're gonna do. You're gonna keep letting the cycle continue if you don't confront people about it.
Hmm. That's true. That's true. That's absolutely true. I agree. I think and that's another thing that's beautiful about art is that sometimes it allows a specific form of criticism that I think if you speak it, you may be criticized and be in trouble, like be arrested for it. But if you sing it or if you write it and or if you paint it, now all of a sudden that criticism ends up becoming a lot more. I don't know, people. Oh, like it's funny. It's like if you're too scared to say it, sing it is something that I've heard before in the music industry because time and time again, whenever people would be ostracized and be go into trouble for saying specific messages that they felt like were important to them, they just turned it into art, and all of a sudden those messages were able to be stamped in the timeline of humanity. They're able to be shared and be able to be kept. So I agree. I agree. I know I know we mentioned this earlier, but did you still want to share a poem and then we can discuss it?
Yeah, I can. And also remember, yes, you said something about a specific line as well that you took an interest in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think I was going to ask this, but I kind of feel like this conversation that we had kind of like answered it for me. There was this line that I saw in your profile on Instagram in spoken works where you said this line, "I've come to understand that art is a labor we will never be free from." And when I first read that line, I felt like I resonated with that, but I didn't understand what was about that I resonated with. I just knew there was just something there. And from our conversation, I feel like I kind of found out what that was, which is I truly believe is that to be human, I think, is to essentially, in some degree, to be an artist because art is everywhere around us. It's a spectrum, and we just choose what part of it we want to gravitate towards.
Yeah.
And yeah. Oh, were you going to say something?
No. I'll let you finish my
No,
apologies.
no worries. But I was just going to say that when I read this line, I think what I really resonated with was how open you are with understanding the depth that came with art. Where if you want to create art to a degree that you feel satisfied with, and also something that is able to be a necessary lifeline for you at moments, I think it has to be laborious because I think the labor is what makes it the satisfaction and makes the art form the necessary lifeline. Because if you don't labor for it, you don't get that deep sense of appreciation that only labor can give you. It's kind of like if you buy a house versus building a house. Like, even if building the built house isn't as pretty as the one that you bought, I bet that you will at some form feel a lot more comfortable in the house that you built if you put in the time for it because you know that your hands were what built it, and you know the stamina, and you know the fatigue, and you know the emotional spectrum that comes with building something that you care about. And yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, what did you get from that when you were writing this line? Like, was that something similar to you, or what were you getting with something as important as
This must
this?
have been maybe a month, no, 2 months. I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the date when this was posted. This must have been a month or two ago or more. I'm not quite sure. You probably have it on your end. But this must have been quite a while ago now, as far as I'm aware. I wrote this in the middle of the night, as far as I remember. Possibly 2 months ago.
It said
More.
11 weeks ago, so maybe around
Yeah,
3 months, like
3 months. Yeah, give or take 3 months. Yeah, so probably like 3 months ago. I wrote it in the middle of the night. I remember I woke up and I was discussing art with a few other poets, and we were discussing art in general at that moment on Instagram and a few other places like Discord. And I'm in a publisher's Discord, and I have some friends in that publisher's Discord, and then we sort of, we keep in touch. And then I also have friends on Instagram and such that I keep in touch with as fellow authors and poets. And I remember talking to one of them a few months ago. I was brought up career, poetry, life, and what do you want to do next from here on out with any of your works? Because one of us is published, another one will be published, another one is in the waiting for publish, and it's just more of a what next? And I kind of just sat there and thought to myself, well, I might as well just make a poem about it, write about it, really, because there's no real way I can tell you what I want to do next, or communicate it with you right now, because if you put me on the spot, I'm just not going to be able to. I'm not that type of person. Woke up 3 months ago on this one night, and it sort of just automatically came to me. You are held hostage by art. There's no real other way than putting it, and you are a slave to any and all labor you must do. You are a slave and a hostage to every single possible thing you want to do with art. But at the same time, acknowledging, you know what, I am a slave to it. Yeah, I will always be a slave to it. It just is. It is what it is. I can't undo that. It is what it is. But being a slave to it, I had to acknowledge in some sense that there is also things I have to acknowledge within the art form of understanding art as the entity that it is, and the labor that comes with it, the heaviness, the emotions, the depth, the sleepless nights, the times you have to describe something, and you have to find a word that is possibly something someone hasn't ever heard of, and you still understand this word, and probably you're the only one, and among several thousand others who maybe understand this specific word, but you still use it to describe something, and it's just the heaviness of I have something to say.
Yeah.
Now, maybe it's not the greatest poem, maybe not, it won't reach a lot of people. I know it won't reach a lot of people, but I had something to say. I had to say it. There was no other way. I had to say it, come what may.
Yeah.
And that sort of became its thing. And, middle of the night, just immediately wrote it down like that, couple of seconds, and that became its thing, really, more or less.
Yeah.
And yeah, that sort of came to be as that. The idea of enslavement to art, but at the same time, that enslavement being equally a duty, enslavement and duty together, hand in hand, so to speak.
hmm hmm No, it's definitely not the most popular take on art, but I do think it's touching more on the truest sense of understanding what art is, which is understanding the idea that if you want to acknowledge what art is, you gotta first understand that it's bigger than all of us. Because
Yeah,
once you understand that it's bigger than all of us and we are simply cogs in this machine of like trying to understand what art is, then we can start understanding the deeper sides of things, which is, you know, how art can affect someone's sense of their perception of the world, how they can teach lessons that people don't share anymore, how they revive appreciation for the humanities, for example. They art is one of those things where it revives thought that people forget, but it also helps create new ones. And that type of insight, I think, doesn't really, that's what's beautiful about art. But also, I guess what's also scary about it is that you learn so much through the process of discovering art and what it means to you and how you're able to channel it, but it also comes at a sacrifice where you have to give something up every time you pursue that. And I
Yeah.
think that's really beautiful. People might see it as terrifying, but I kind of see it as kind of like a natural clause of the world, which is if you want something to a specific degree, at some level, you have to sacrifice something to gain it, whether it's your time, your energy. Sometimes it could be more than that. But at the bare minimum, to pursue art to a degree where you're able to reach a level where you feel like you're being seen through your own art, or you feel like you're properly communicating your message and learning it, you have to sacrifice the time and your energy to be able to fully understand what this is. So no, I appreciate you just being honest about your answer about that, because it also shows that great ideas, when they're meant to be shared, they're meant to be shared. There's no timing to it, and there sometimes isn't a crazy story that comes with why you write some of the things that you do. Sometimes it just comes, and sometimes that is the answer, and that is okay sometimes. So yeah, I really like that. Like, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
You want me to introduce a poem or
Yeah, absolutely.
oh yeah, there we go. I have one
Hmm.
among this is I performed like two or three, I think two of these a couple about a week or so ago, or 2 weeks ago maybe, before Easter break here at one of my classrooms here, together on. I might have it if you give me just a moment here.
No worries.
I have the specific book in mention that I want to mention. There we go. So I was at this one spoken word day at our university, and we had a guest author called Kane Holborn, Dr. Kane Holborn. I have his book over here. He's a very proficient writer, mind you. He suffers from specific medical things, but even so, he became a doctor in creative writing. And I've read his works. I've read some other works as well, and I performed some of my poetry on that day as well for my classroom. So I guess I'll take one of those
Sure.
and just tell you about it, I guess. The one that I have here is called Wanderer's Finality, and it's one that is about travel in some sense, at the same time being an outcast as a foreigner and a stranger in different countries, more or less. Wanderer's Finality. I carry my country in a copper book. It is faded white and grey inside, worn thin with too many apologies. The rifle he holds is a sign of authority in full armor, military dress. His silence holds the weight of a million judgments and the memories of people who never pass through this idle checkpoint. No place has loved me enough to keep me. I've been a stranger in Rome, a lover in Paris, in the warm arms of a woman who smelled of saffron. Even my name feels borrowed. I exist between embassies, the departures of flights, and I now have an accent to lie with when they ask me where I am from. And nothing is more painful than knowing you will forever remain a ghost, even in the heart of who you love. And that's
Wow.
it. That's the poem.
Yeah, no, I thank you for sharing that. I yeah, like if you don't mind me asking, like, so yeah, I mean, I remember like when you were sharing about your story and stuff. Like, I'm assuming that this poem is something that very is attached to your childhood and how the things that you had to face. I'm sure when you were younger and stuff. And one thing that I think this poem really got to me is you said that the book holds a lot of unissued apologies, And you even said that even your name feels borrowed sometimes. And I think that was really special. I think people don't, when it comes to stuff like immigration and like, people moving countries and stuff, I feel like there is a specific line of empathy that I think comes from understanding one's extreme uncomfort from not feeling like they belong in a place that others call home. That is something that I think is a very um I my parents are immigrants, and my parents believed in the American dream, which is why they came here. And I grew up in a world where I was raised to believe that the American dream was something where it's like if you work hard, you will be seen. Period. That's the unconditional statement. That's pretty much how it works. And then I grew up and I realized that there's no, like, every situation comes with its terms and conditions. And then you start realizing that, wait a minute, maybe there's a certain group of people that tend to naturally get a lot more chances at getting things right than others. Or you walk into a room, maybe some messages are louder than others, and maybe the ones that talk about things like being seen, equality, the fight for wanting to belong somewhere, sometimes those are drowned out by by people that get easily offended by the words rather than the message, which I think is sometimes disrespectful. Because if you always just take a word out of context and you say it, of course it can come off as mean. But when you look at the whole message that is being shared, you know I think, yeah, I think the poem does a great job at, for me at least, just you speaking, I had to close my eyes to really picture what you were saying, because I pictured the emotions that come from, I think about a little child that is holding on to a parent's hand and they're walking through security gates to enter another country, and they get declined and they get pushed away. you know yes, in terms of what the paperwork says and what in terms of what society says, people may argue that that is the correct action. But, correction in my head doesn't really matter. I'm thinking about the emotion that the little child sees from not understanding context of the world, but just seeing a person look at you and say, no, like, we don't want you. For someone that doesn't understand the politics, someone that doesn't understand what's going on in the world, they see an action like that and they probably feel like there's something wrong with them. And I feel like there's a fear of innate thinking that makes you wonder, is there something wrong with me that's making it hard for me to be accepted into this society, where if I look across the gate, everybody else is happy, everybody else is belonging, yet here I am being rejected because of whatever reason it may be. Sometimes it's a lot more cruel to find out what that reason is. Sometimes you wish that you just didn't know, because the truth sometimes may hurt more than the ambiguity of, like, why am I not being seen properly? And that poem, I think, is something that resonates with a lot of people in this world today. And I think, one thing that I also wanted to ask, but I kind of felt like it was something that was answered through your conversation. You were talking about classical works and you were talking about how you study these arts. And I wanted to ask if you feel seen sometimes by some of these works that you study, because you were telling me that, you lived a very tough childhood and a tough past, and you turned to writing for your necessity of survival. And I wanted to ask if when you read classical works or when you see artists do what they do, from the past, do you feel seen? But I kind of felt like the way that you were talking about these artists and the way that you were talking about the art, I felt like you were already answering it, which is like, I feel like when you study the past and you study these arts and these classics and the philosophical work that you say that you love so much, I feel like you were kind of sharing that it's taught you to kind of resonate with your own form of speech, your own form of talking about what really means a lot to you. And when you create poetry like this, it's kind of like this weird full circle moment where I can totally see your own words doing the same thing for somebody else. Because what you're talking about is something that a lot of people, I feel like, hear the message behind the words of what you're sharing.
Do I feel seen? No, I don't. I can't say I feel seen. I struggle to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest. Yes, I really struggle with to be understood. There's many times where my friends are unable to understand me. There's many times where someone who loves me is unable to understand me. There's many times where sometimes I'll have an old friend of mine who I've known many years now, and even though I'm a distant person, I'm not close as a person. With my friendships, I'm the least close as a person. Like I will stay the furthest away from everyone emotionally, in every sense of like friendship. I will not allow it.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Will not happen. I have this one old friend who I do allow, and even he at times and I at times, we both struggle to understand each other at full, but he understands that I am very much a person who, even if I may read things, understand things, and see things, and feel a lot of things, I am not necessarily seen and understood. I am felt, but there's only that. I am felt. I am not seen, nor am I understood, because understanding me would take it would take understanding many more horrific things and many other things in terms of understanding a solitary person who needs solitude, but also doesn't need solitude, also needs intimacy, needs physicality, needs someone to be there with them, needs there's a thin line between a desperate thing that wants to be held and felt and have someone there emotionally and intimately versus another distant strange fugue of a creature, a mist that can talk to you but isn't quite there and isn't really present. They're just over there but doesn't really want to be understood because that thing wants to be far away from everything else. And I'm often not even there. There's many times where even my partner can tell you this, even my friends, anyone really who knows me in a real actual depth will tell you like 50 to 40% of the time I'm not there. I am not even present. You can be talking to me and telling me all sorts of information. 90% of that chance is I will be looking somewhere else and my mind will be on some entirely different thing while taking in all your information, everything you say to me, everything you do. Like I'll still acknowledge you're there, but am I actually there? No. I'm somewhere completely else. Not
Mm-hmm.
even present. And yeah, like I don't feel seen by art. Not really. But I don't at the same time I don't want to be seen. I don't need to be seen. I just need people to feel and understand an emotion. If they can just do that, just that alone, that's enough for me. Anything beyond it, I don't need it. I don't want it. I'm okay with being alone. All I really need is like one person I love, and that's like my partner and the person I love, and that just that, mainly just that. If I have that, I don't really need much else because people to me aren't the things I want so much as I see you as the silent, distant observer, but I don't want to be anywhere near you. I just want to give you hope and tell you an emotion and maybe give you some sort of let you be seen with that emotion but not necessarily be seen myself. Just give you the help to survive another day.
Right.
And that is good enough for me. Even so, with any art I've read, any books, sculptures, anything, yeah, no, I've never felt seen. I don't think I have ever felt seen. Not really. I think only once have I felt seen, but that is a much more personal event.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something I would want to discuss with anyone really, but I think I've only ever felt seen in that.
Mm-hmm.
Anything beyond that,
I see.
no.
Yeah. No, then I apologize for assuming that then. I mean, that was just just the way that you were talking about art sometimes, like when you were talking about the humanities and stuff, and like how you see things and you have a gravitation towards earlier works where you're able to understand like a lot more of like the philosophical side of like literature and what people are talking about. I just like the way you were speaking about it, it just felt like it resonated with you that deeply. But I could also understand what you're saying, where, you know, to to be seen would require someone to like actually live your life and actually be able to understand what you actually went through, which is why you're not looking for it, but you create things that can help people get through their situation, that you also acknowledge that I won't be able to understand what you're going through, you won't understand what I'm going through, but here's like a little bit of like a little bit like meeting me halfway type thing, where it's like I'm giving you a message that can give you hope and sprout the idea that maybe one day you will be able to keep on going, to where you might find people that you have in your life, like your partner, maybe they can find someone like that, or maybe they can have that profound moment, and I mean that just that moment in their life where they might feel seen, in their own life somewhere. But I think that's still a beautiful message that you're pursuing, which is delivering an emotion regardless of whether you're seen or not. Like, I think that's a very noble thing, because many people, especially in today's society, you create stuff and that stuff becomes popular. Okay, all of a sudden, hey, this is the face, this is who I am. I was right behind the poem. Like, I wrote this, or I wrote this book. Like, I'm a celebrity now. And, like, because of the way that society today, magnifies fame, people feel like they need to be famous and they need to be a part of the conversation. But
Yeah,
that kind of is against what artistry is. It's not really about the artist as much as it's about the art itself. And the conversation shouldn't really go towards keep giving a platform to the person creating it, but giving a platform to the universal message that this piece of art is showing, and maybe talking about the work itself rather than the person that made it. And I think that's a really great message to share, because I think it creates more conversation about what it means to be an artist. What does it mean to be a fan of art? What is art itself? And I think that this interview is one of the it's given me a lot more questions than answers on what art is, which I really enjoy, because I feel like if there's one thing I know about life is that I don't really know much of it. I think I sometimes I think I do, but then something
we all
happens.
do. We all really do. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And then something happens and you're like, I don't think I understood this at all. And it's happened to me multiple times where I've actually become more comfortable being uncomfortable, because that means that there's more to look into and there's more to explore. And I think that's the beauty of art, is that we live in a world where there's something like art that exists that's bigger than all of us, and that we just tend to have our own little section where we're able to understand our relationship with it. And I think that's very, I don't know, it's almost like it's almost spiritual. Like, I don't want to, like, I'm not trying to make it sound like that, but it's almost like this thing is just bigger than us. Like, art is just so much bigger than us, and we can only try our best to contemplate how we work around it. But at the end of the day, we
Yeah.
are enslaved to it to some degree. We are
In
trapped by it. Like, we are slaves to like how we work with it. Yeah.
I mean, hell, if my partner didn't give me the Book of Herodotus, which is, mind you, it's very big, like giant.
Mhm.
Yeah, I read it, and yeah, it took me. I'm not gonna say it took me a few days. It took me like 2 3 months to read the entire thing, because it's a giant book with a lot of research. I mean, a lot of research. But like, having read the Book of Herodotus, you need to philosophize on art. It's not that simple. You have to. You really have to. Even if he was a traveler back in ancient Greece, he noted everything he saw, every accident, every person. Yeah, maybe some descriptions are a bit racist and strange, because as an ancient man, maybe you have your biases towards, like, I don't know, the ancient Egyptians, or like the Spartans or something. And he did.
Right.
He did. He had like really specific, strange biases that are very weird.
Yeah.
But like, even he understood, if I don't write down my travels and what I see and what I learn, I will never learn myself. And you need to take that message further on, even now, as you, even if people don't like you, even if people hate you, and even if you are not likable to people for what you believe in, have to say, or whatever else, that's okay, because in the end, you are living to learn than rather living to be in a cage.
That was that's true. That's true. I think people are sometimes um I think people are sometimes unaware that they're in a cage because they're probably born into the perspective that their cage is freedom. And
Yeah,
that's another thing that I love about art is that art teaches you the idea that there's other perspectives, and with these perspectives comes the contradiction in thought, comes the conflict of like understanding, what's going on versus what do I know, what's going on in the world, your relationship with some of these things that you see. And I totally think that's such a great message on what you're saying, because yeah, I'd rather share these thoughts and be free than to be silent and to be in a cage, because at the end of the day, you know if there's one thing that's definitive, is that death comes for us all at some point. And I truly believe that, if you live your life to the truest, which is by chasing that freedom of just speaking what you feel like needs to be spoken, I feel like you will end up obtaining a sense of peace for your own self, that you at least tried to put yourself into a position of wanting to get out of that cage and wanting to pursue something that's bigger than even yourself at that moment. And yeah, I think that's a great takeaway, for this interview. It's it just shows that to pursue art is not something as simple as like, oh, I'm an artist, I'm gonna just go do something and that's it. It's a discipline. It's a art form of itself. It's like to study art is art, because you have to digest things, you have to consume things, you have to take things in. You have to let that challenge you, you have to let that create some kind of emotional strife within you, and then use that to kind of transform what you took in into communicating what you put out and kind of giving your own take on it. And that's how humanity advances, right? It's through taking
yeah,
in the works of other people and then analyzing it and then giving your own personal take on it. It's how we've always been living as a species. Like, ever since cavemen started drawing on walls. Maybe like you look at a caveman wall painting and you see two huntsmen getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger or something. And then whether or not it's like that's art because it's a painting, but what's the message? Stay away from predators. And then next thing you know, the next painting may have spears. Okay, now there's self-defense being in the conversation. And that's how you learn in the sciences, that's how you learn in the humanities, and ultimately that's how we become better artists. So Ectorius, like, thank you for getting on this interview and speaking, this honest truth about what you think art is, what your relationship with art is, and how, just because these ways aren't talked about in the as much as in the past, it doesn't mean they're not as important. So thank you for speaking about a voice that, we both agree on is kind of disappearing in today's world. But that doesn't mean it's not important. It just means that conversations like these are more important, that we need to have more conversations where we talk about the things that have happened in the past with art and the way that people used to process things. Because we live in the same world, we're just in a different time. And that still creates this need for us to create philosophical thought, to contemplate, to have that darkness and to work with it, to create messages of hope, but to also create messages that sometimes communicate something darker than that, and to speak your ultimate truth, which I think only you can decipher what that is. And that goes for every person that decides to go on this journey. But yeah, Ectorius, thank you so much for getting onto this interview. Thank you for sharing such a honest journey about what you've been doing. And for anybody that wants to follow Ectorius on his journey of, going about art and creating prose and poetry and other writings, please check out his Instagram at Ectorius Angel. And there you will be able to see some of his work, as well as links to where you can obtain some of his work, as well as other collections of other poetry of people that Ectorius have worked with. But Ectorius, once again, thank you so much for being on this interview.
Not a problem at all.